You are listening to the Thinking Effect podcast with Orshel Green and Liliane Kriegler.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 15 of the Thinking Effect podcast. And this episode is all about how can teachers create a classroom culture where great thinkers thrive. And episode 15 actually relates to our previous episode 14, where we spoke about how can teacher create a safe environment where students can focus on learning. And the reason we continue with this theme is because, as you well aware, after the years of COVID, it's very important to attend to the emotional well-being of our students. And this is why Liliane and I feel that we need to explore that space a bit further and support you more in creating an environment where we help our students, feel good about themselves and enjoy coming to school. So before we jump into it, I want to say hello to Liliane. Hi, Liliane.
Hey, Orshel. I always say, hey, Orshel. It's lovely to see you, episode 15. And here we are sharing some of our, hopefully, very helpful information with you once again.
Yes, and I would love for us to kick off with the story you shared with me before about the fish and the water. It's a lovely story, and I want everyone to hear it because I think it sets the environment for our episode.
This is right. So the story is about these two young fish, and they're swimming along in the water. And, coming towards them is an older fish. And the older fish says, as they do, "Good morning, boys. How is the water?" And they nod and they say, "Oh, yeah, all good, thanks." And they swim off, the two of them, and the older fish disappears. And then a minute later, the one young fish turns to the other one and says, "What the heck is water?" And, it's a classic story. And it was told in 2005. So it's lasted the test of time. And it was told by David Foster Wallace, who represented his graduation group at the Kenyon College. And he told the story at the graduation. And what he was saying that is very, very often, the things that are most important to us are the ones that are invisible to us. So the fish depend on water for their existence, but they can't see it.
Yeah.
Weird, yeah?
It is. And yeah, it's a great segue or kind of a great way to start talking about culture, because culture is all around us, right?
Yes.
It's and the impact of our culture on our well-being, on our confidence, on our ability to learn and thrive is so critical. And often we don't pay attention to the culture that we're in. We kind of let it be what it defaults to be. And we're not being intentional about what kind of culture we want to have, for example, in our classroom, what kind of environment we want to have in a classroom. And it's very critical because if we set an environment, a culture of trust, for example, then our students feel confident to take risks in the learning, right? Try new things, be vulnerable and open themselves up in front of their peers. And so it's very important. And you were talking about invisible thing, but for me, culture is also something like the energy in the room that you can actually feel with your body. I don't know about you, but sometimes, when you enter a room, you can feel whether it's a good energy, uplifting, or sometimes you can feel it really gets you down. It's kind of not a great environment to get into. So there is an element that we sense with our body when we get into the room, and that's the energy that's in the room, and that's part of the culture we create. It creates an energy within our environment.
No, you're perfectly correct. And I talk about these great schools in Reggio Emilia. Carla Rinaldi is one of their spokespeople, and she says children read culture and they read it really, really quickly. And I love the word you use about default culture, because yes, if we are not aware of it as educators, we can't plan for it. So You know, culture isn't something that gets transmitted down from the past or from above. It is something that we can actually create together, and bringing awareness to it is fantastic. And you're absolutely right that, you know, it impacts on the energy, whether the environment feels buoyant and happy and accepting and inclusive, or whether, you know, there's some kind of antagonism or some kind of negativity that's residing in that environment. And, you know, you mentioned COVID, and I think we have to be even more aware than we were before COVID, because a lot of children haven't had the time in the classroom with their peers and with the teachers that they've had. And so, you know, they might even have lost touch with understanding feelings, emotions. They might have to reignite their motivation in the classroom. So it is a massively important idea to be working with at the moment in classrooms.
Definitely, definitely. And if we want to create a classroom where it's a place for optimal learning, we need to pay a close attention to the culture and the emotional well-being of our students. Otherwise, like we said, you kind of go back to some default. So you have to design the culture that you want to have in order to enable your students to learn better and think better. And Lilian, we discussed it before, how our cognitive abilities, capabilities are tied to our emotional well-being. You mentioned it's kind of the two sides of the same coin, because when we feel insecure, when we don't trust the people we are with, where we're not comfortable sharing and bringing our whole self into our learning, this is where our ability to learn is being impaired. And so if we want to enable our students to really think deeply and meaningfully and learn and take themselves to kind of push themselves more and challenge themselves, we have to first look after our culture and create the culture that we want to have in our classroom.
Yes, that's right. I mean, you know, Jean Piaget, the renowned psychologist, and even his student, Ruben Feuerstein, they, you know, that idea of the feelings and the thinking, or the feelings and the ability to learn being completely connected as both sides of the coin, is massively important, because we know that when our feelings, when we're in overwhelm, or we're feeling anxious, or, you know, we don't fully understand what's happening, or there's some uncertainty, that the brain starts to focus on that and on protecting itself. And it does it in three ways. And we know these ways. And I'm sure all our teachers have heard before about, you know, they either fight, or they flee, or they freeze. So, I mean, our students might be fleeing in a way that they're just not giving us their attention. You know, they've gone off somewhere else in their mind, or they've just frozen. So unless you have that sense of balance, and unless students are in a state of readiness and reciprocating the learning, then it's going to be very difficult for them to take in new information. So one of the things I think that a lot of educators are understanding now is that we kind of have to slow down, maybe even what we're doing.
Definitely.
Just to ensure that everyone is on board, and, you know, checking in as you did, as you're saying, and maybe bringing their awareness to culture as well.
Absolutely. I think that, yeah, the culture is the foundation, and now we need to look after our foundation, especially after the last couple of years. It all has been really shaken well by COVID, and so we need to go back to our foundation and look after it. And in terms of how to do it, yes, I think that the best starting point is for each teacher to have a discussion with their student about what is a culture. Because as we know, they might not be aware of what it is. Yes, it is all around them, it impacts them. But they need to actually think about what is a culture. And then after you're having such a discussion with your student, you can pose another question and ask them, what culture do we want to have in our classroom? So let your student come up with what are the values that drive them, what kind of culture would help and support them. And then you can actually write down maybe a few of the things you agreed on in terms of what kind of culture you want to create in your classroom, whether it's a culture of trust and empathy and kindness, whatever you'll come up with. You can actually create a poster or, I don't know, bring it to life in some manner, and then hold everyone accountable that this is the culture we want to have here, and therefore it impacts how we behave. It drives how we behave in the classroom. And if someone behaves in a different way, in a way that doesn't align with the culture we want to design here, then you can point that out and say, well, does it align with the culture we want to have, and correct that behavior. And so slowly everyone will get used to behave in a manner that aligns with the culture you want to develop.
No, you're so absolutely right. You know, and if students aren't aware of it, they can't buy into it. But if they have had if they've actually had a stake in creating the culture, then they will start to tell each other or expect from each other a particular way of being with one another, you know. And I think, as you've mentioned, the emotions are really important. And I think you had a suggestion for what, you know, educators might do in the classroom so that the educator can gauge what's happening around that emotional tone in the room.
Yeah, definitely. There are a few things that I wanted to share. One of them is having an emotional barometer. So you can create, put on the wall, you know, a few emojis with different expression. Let's say one of them is sad, one is neutral, one is happy. And you can create a broader range of emotion on that wall. And then in the morning when your students come into class, you can ask them to place, you know, a piece of paper or whatever it is with their name on the place that represent better their emotion, on the emotional barometer. So it will allow you and them as well to assess and understand how they're feeling now. And as a teacher, you can see if there's a particular trend in your classroom. Maybe there are quite a few students who, I don't know, maybe feel angry or maybe feel sad, and you can address it and uplift them to the level you want them to be. And it's also an opportunity to help students articulate their emotional state, because usually most people actually using only between 5 to 7 emotions when they want to explain to someone else how they feel. But we know that there are there are 27 different types of emotions, and most of us are not using a broad range of words to represent how we feel. So it's also an opportunity to help students understand how to better articulate how they're feeling. And that, you know, help when you communicate with others, you can better express and explain how you feel. So that's one way to go about it. And another way I wanted to suggest, we spoke about the energy that you bring into the room. And so another way to go about it is having a kind of a stop sign at the door to your classroom that says, how do you feel? So stop for a minute, think about how do you feel? And maybe a question about what kind of emotion you bring into the classroom. And so make the students aware of, firstly, how they feel, but also what happens when they bring these emotions into the classroom? How does it impact themselves and others? And so when you gain more awareness of how you impact your environment, it helps you also to change your emotion or make sure you're not negatively impacting others.
Yes, there's so many things I love about what you just said, Auto. I don't know where to start. But the first thing is, you know, as you say, articulating these ideas is really important. And the more vocabulary the students have, the more ability they have to pause and say, how do I feel? You know, am I angry, or am I just a bit frustrated, or am I feeling sad, how am I actually feeling? And then, as you say, to actually say, am I feeling gleeful? Am I feeling amused? There's so excited. There's so many of these emotions. So the bigger the vocabulary, the more the students are able to not just act out their emotion, but think about it, pause, adjust, calibrate. So that is the one thing that I really love about it. And the other thing is, that emoji wall, when we were discussing it between ourselves, we thought, maybe the older students really are going to think this is a bit twee or a little bit, uncool. but really in Melbourne, there's a big school, a huge school that was having a lot of trouble with students feeling, alienated at school and not being involved in their learning. And the educators were tearing their hair out saying, what can we do about this? So they came up with something quite revolutionary. And maybe it's not that revolutionary because other people may have done it before, but for them it was, they started a breakfast club. And so they, students would come a little bit earlier to school. They'd go into the breakfast club and they'd be eating, which is great for the brain anyway.
Yes.
Maybe they'd skip breakfast. That's one good thing. Hydration and having, something water in your system helps the brain, as we know. But they also just casually asked them to pop up their name under these columns. And, the people who were supervising Breakfast Club could get an idea of how people were feeling. And if somebody had, done something uncharacteristic, then they would find the opportunity to have a small talk during the day with that students and say, I noticed that, you today, you put your name under this thing. Do you want to share? What would you, is there anything that I can do? What can we do? Anyway, over time, what they found was more and more students were coming to Breakfast Club. It was growing and growing. That students were waking up their parents earlier to get them to school. And overall, the tone, the emotional tone improved. Look, they did other things like they created rubrics around different things like, so how am I feeling about my learning? How am I feeling today? How am I feeling about my friends? How am I, so they did, there was more to it than just Breakfast Club. But the thing was that they were creating a new culture of how they viewed their students, of what they were prepared to do for their students. And it transformed the school. It really was remarkable. Their results just really rose significantly. And it had to do with the students feeling more comfortable, listened to, supported, and they started to become the people who supported others.
I'm not surprised. It's a beautiful story, and I'm not surprised it made such a difference because they created a culture of kindness and empathy and looking after each other and building that trust that we're here for you, right? Whatever you need, we're here for you, and whatever you feel, you can share it with us and we'll look after you and we'll help you. And so I'm not surprised that this change to the culture made such a difference to their academic performances as well, because as we said, this is the foundation for everything. And it's a great example on how you need to be intentional about your culture, and you need to design the culture you want to have, and you'll see the results.
Yep, that's really what it is at the base, is about not just acting out a culture without being aware of it. So students will benefit, but and I love the word empathy, because a lot of times the anxiety that students are feeling is not only from the work, it's not only from their teachers, it could be from their peer group. We are both, and all educators are aware of, the degree of bullying, and especially these days with that digital stuff that goes on where, you're far removed from the person you're attacking, etc. And if we encounter something like that, and we both spoke about this too when we thought about this podcast, is if you are getting too deep in the water in terms of, students are really in trouble, then we need to open the channels for them to see someone professional there, you know, someone who's in charge of the pastoral care at the school psychologist, or, you know, we really, if conversations need to be opened with parents, you know, we have that responsibility, but we'll be more aware of it.
Exactly.
And, you know, and we'll be putting the stepping stones in place much more successfully if we are understanding and creating a culture where everybody cares, and where there is, I love your word, kindness as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Shall we summarize the episode?
Yeah, sure. You want me to do it, or you gonna
I
have
always love your summaries, Liliane.
Okay. So what culture is something that determines how everybody in an environment is behaving. And this culture can be default, where it's just acted out without much awareness. But it is also something that we as educators or parents, or even in the workplace, can create. The why is that if our culture isn't supportive of learning and of contribution and of care and of success, then it's not going to happen. So we have to put steps in place to make sure that children are moving out of survival mode, out of anxiety, into openness to learning. So that's the why. The how is to really check in with students about how they understand culture. Let them build their own ideas, come up with their own definitions, and what is the behavior code that fits with those definitions. And also for us to check in specifically to emotion, because we know that emotion and cognition are two sides of the same coin. And the more we're aware of it, the more we are able to help them.
Excellent summary. I love it. And so we encourage you to take the time and do this, design the culture with your students, and you'll be amazed by the outcomes of this exercise. And we are happy for you, and we encourage you to share your stories with us. Please write to us to the Think in Effect podcast at gmail.com. We love to hear your stories, and thank you so much for all the educators from around the globe that have been in touch with us. We love hearing your stories. So feel free to write, and we'll meet again in the next episode, episode number 16, which is all about how can teachers create space for curiosity?
Yeah, well, that's a bit different. So we're going from calm, kind to curious. We'll see you in the next episode.
See you then.